just a little bit. There we go. There we go. As soon as I went live, I had the urge to cough. How amazing is that? Amazing. I apologize for all of the adjustments. As soon as I go live, I'm like, oh, I need to adjust a whole other thing. Always, always. Also, I'm standing up today. Hey, what do you know? I changed my whole setup so that I could do a lot more standing a lot more easily. It only took me, what, a year and a half? That's all it took me to get this way. Yep. So I'm standing. I also have like a little thing here for my knee. Hey friends. Welcome to some live office hours with me, Dr. Shannon Coates, here in about an hour north of Toronto. And I am in Canada, Toronto, Canada. And I am talking today on, as you know, if you have followed me for a little bit, on Fridays I like to go, oh, hi Michelle, yay! Well, watching it live is my preferred way to do it, so welcome. Yeah, because the recorded one, oh, hi! Oh, South Africa. Love it. Welcome. That's a long ways away. Talking today on Fridays. On Fridays, I generally like to talk about philosophical things and like the art of teaching and things that to consider in when we're teaching. And then on Mondays in my live office hours, I like to talk about practical applications in the voice studio. So I haven't decided yet what I'm going to talk about on Monday. So if you have a question, hi Amy! If you have a question that you would like to, something sort of about a practical application in the voice studio that you'd like to kind of talk about, let me know. Just send me a message. I am happy to talk about it if I can, or address it if I can. So that's on Mondays. So Mondays at 9 Eastern Standard Time. And of course, everything is always recorded for later. So, and you can watch them on Facebook or on Instagram, or you can go over to my Vimeo. I also put them on YouTube, but I have like 4 followers on YouTube. So if you want to be my friend on YouTube, feel free. Just know that I'm not super active over there. Yet, maybe someday, who knows, but I definitely, everything's up on Vimeo as well, so you can take a look there too. And the great thing about Vimeo is closed captions plus speed changes, which I think you might be able to do on YouTube now too, but anyway, closed caption plus you can listen to me at 1.5 times if you're brave, or you could also just slow me right down, which is probably the better way to do it, let's be honest. Big talker. Okay, so today, when we're talking sort of more philosophical, I'm talking a little bit more about the art of teaching. I wanted to talk a little bit about who do you listen to and becoming a little bit more discerning about the voice ped voices in your head. Ooh, that should be a song, eh? Like maybe by the Zombies. In your head. Okay, so who are the voice ped voices in your head? And what are they saying to you that may not actually be amazing for you as a teacher and for the people you teach? So this came to me, this topic, the reason I'm addressing this topic right now is a few things that I've been talking about online, but also someone specifically said to me something like, so-and-so, insert respected voice pedagogy person here, says that, insert very good piece of advice about teaching singing here, but I found that it doesn't seem to work with insert voice specific kind of voice student and or style here. And what often happens, so we're independent voice teachers, right? We don't necessarily, unless we're really planning well, we don't necessarily have the time or inclination. Lots of folks don't have the inclination to read voice ped texts. Lots of folks don't, and I am one of those folks, believe it or not. I don't love reading voice ped texts. I do it, but I don't love it. So, lots of folks don't have that inclination, or don't necessarily have the time to do like deep dives into a course, for example. So like independent voice teachers, we don't necessarily, unless we build it in, and the business is a whole other thing, but like unless we build it in, we don't tend to build in, 2 months off or 4 months off in the summertime, like our academic colleagues have, in order to do some research, or in order to, find that pet project, hey Petra, or in order to, do like a deep dive on a subject that we're looking at, or something along those lines, right? Or to do some continuing education. So we don't necessarily have that time. We are, in general, or at least my experience as an independent voice teacher has been that I'm teaching my face off 24/7. And again, maybe talk to Michelle Margaret DeVoe if you are teaching your face off 24/7 and you don't want to be doing that. So maybe talk to her about structuring your business a little bit differently. But we tend to do a lot of teaching, right? We're out there doing the work, and we're teaching for however many hours per week, and then we're doing the administration to run the business, and we're doing all of the back end work in order to support our students, and in order to be able to run the studio in the way we want it to run, etc. So we tend to do that, and we tend to then sort of out of convenience, not convenience is the wrong word, but out of self help, like out of being efficient with our time, we tend to kind of find a couple of people who we trust to be the person that we look to for answers to questions that we may have as we're going along, or for resources that we may need as we're going along, right? So we kind of tend to like pick your favorite way of interacting with someone. Perhaps you love podcasts, and so then you're listening to some, specific podcasters as you go, which is terrific. Or perhaps you do love reading textbooks. So then you read a chapter here or there, and you kind of get some good information as you go. Or perhaps, you like listening to me blather live, and so you come and listen to me, or watch some of my replays or something along those lines. Or you kind of, or perhaps you love reading blogs, so you go and, find someone who has a terrific blog, or etc. There's so many ways to get your information, but we tend to kind of like find someone who we trust, and then take the information that person is giving, and then just kind of put it into our practice, which is fair. It's fair. What I wanted to talk about today is where the breakdown of that happens when we're not being really intentional about understanding where our voice ped information people are coming from. So, and this breaks down when we don't realize, for example, that the person who we're listening to for advice around teaching a specific kind of way, or teaching a specific technical skill, for example, happens to work with a completely different population of singers than the ones that we're working with, right? So this is something that, so then the information that's being given, or the information that we're taking on, may be amazing information, may be absolutely useful information, just not for the population of singers that we are working with, right? So a great example of this is someone who is, say, terrific at contemporary styles and popular styles. So someone who has, who has really done the research there, and has done and does, seminars and all that kind of thing. So they're excellent at contemporary style and singing in popular musics, but they don't work with children, right? So they've never worked with children, and they don't work with children in their Petra, yes. And they don't work with children or teenagers or changing voice in their everyday studio life, which is fine. That's amazing. But if we take the information wholesale from that person who happens to be amazing at what they do and understands contemporary styles and understands, and is able to articulate terrific information, but we take that information without understanding that that information is actually meant for mature voices. It's actually meant for late teen, young adult, and beyond voices. We take that information, we apply it to children's voices, or we apply it to changing voices, or expanding voices, or young adolescent voices. That may not be the best information for that population. So that's something, that's an example, and this does happen quite a lot when I'm working with teachers, and when I'm working in practicums with teachers as well. This happens quite a lot, where the person I'm working with in the studio, or that I'm working with in the practicum, they're a fabulous teacher, but the majority of the folks that they're working with are, say, children or young adolescents, or expanding voices. So they've taken this very good information about, say, contemporary singing or belting or mixing, etc. They've taken this very good information from someone without understanding that that information applies very specifically to and is most useful for the late adolescent, late teens, mature voice. And by mature, I don't mean like old, I just mean like the voice is no longer in the adolescent stage, right? So we're in terms of maturity, that the structures are settled now, the the coordination is possible, the brain has kicked in. All of those things that we consider in a mature body are now in place. And so then that information is really useful for those singers, but not necessarily for children. So some other examples of this, I mean, I pulled my beautiful Miller off the shelf just to be like, hey, look, Miller, fabulous voice pedagogue, wrote a whole bunch of texts that have been incredibly useful. The information in this book, I mean, it's, for my taste, it's a little bit chaotic. It's not like super well laid out, but whatevs, it's great information. The information in this book, if you take the information in this book about onset, about inhalation, about breathing for singing, about flow phonation, about pressurization, about agility, about legato, about all of the things that are in this book. If you take all of that information and you apply it to popular music styles, you will have very not great popular music singers on your hands, because this information is very specific toward a Western classical singing. Very specific toward Western classical singing. And if you take the information here and you say, okay, Miller's awesome, fantastic voice ped guy, and these texts are amazing and the information is amazing, and if you take the information wholesale and apply it to music theater or popular music styles, you're not going to have really successful results. The results are not going to be great, because that information is meant for Western classical singing. So that's an example, again, of someone who is fabulous. The information is fabulous, but we need to be really intentional about making sure that the information we're getting actually is meant for the population we're teaching. I also had, Ken Bozeman's books, who, again, fabulous. I'm just like pulling out all the names here, but just like a fabulous voice pedagogue. If you want to just like have your brain a little bit, just like read everything Ken Bozeman posts on, on the Facebook forums, because his information is fabulous. It's so beautifully well thought out, and he articulates things so beautifully. I love it, love it, love it. And at the same time, Ken Bozeman teaches Western classical singing to 18 to 24-year-olds, and folks who are on a sort of performance or elite singer track, right? So overall, I mean, that's who he teaches, and he's very clear about that as well. He's never saying, this is what is good for every single singer. He never says that. That's not his style, and he understands that this is not necessarily information that every single voice teacher needs, and that every single student is going to, the application of it isn't necessarily going to be great for every single student. He understands that. However, we sometimes take this on, right? So we're like, ooh, Ken Bozeman, amazing. And he is, and his information is amazing. And then we don't think, okay, But does this work for like belting? Maybe not so much. And does this work? Is this information really useful for teaching my my estrogen influenced my folks with estrogen influenced puberties, with larynxes that were influenced by estrogen through puberty? Is this really useful information for those singers? It's not as. It's not as. Understand who is giving you the information, where they're coming from. So a couple of questions to ask yourself. What's their background, right? Where did their information come from in the first place? What are some of the things that they might be bringing with them to this information? And you are welcome to ask that about me. I'm very open about that as well, right? Like, I have 3 Western classical music degrees in performance voice. So like, I got a lot of Western classical stuff going on, and a lot of, what's the word? Like, my body responds in a very specific way to when I think deep inhalation, right? So I think deep inhalation, my body responds in a very specific way because I've been trained to have like this swing out in the ribs, to have an open sensation in the throat, to have a high soft palate sensation, we'll just call it that for now, but and to have a lowered larynx sensation, right? Like, this is the training that I have, and because I've had 3 Western classical degrees. So when I if I don't take that apart and think to myself, okay, but is this useful for my popular music styles and belting? No, it's not useful for belting. This kind of inhalation where I have open throat, you hear what I did to my voice, where I do that kind of inhalation, it's not actually that useful for other styles. And so you're going to, if you're working with someone, or if you are taking information from someone, understand what their background is and understand what's going to influence what they think is the right information. Something else to ask yourself is, who do they teach? Who do they teach? Who are they working with on a regular basis? Who is in their studio? So if they're teaching, again, coming back to the example of someone who's only teaching, like late adolescent and above, if that's the only population of singers that they're teaching on the regular, they may not have the information that you need in order to teach children. They may not have that information, right? So like, who do they teach? And who do they have, like, who are they solving problems for? Who are they finding efficiencies for and coordinations for on the regular in their voice studios, right? Who are they working with? And is it the same population as the people you're working with? And if not, that's fine. Recognize it. Recognize that that's what's happening. And so then the information, you may need to kind of take the information apart a little bit in order for it to be useful for the population that you work with. The other thing to ask is, where do they teach, right? Where do they teach? So do they have an independent voice studio? I mean, this kind of goes along with who do they teach, right? Do they have an independent voice studio? If you're an independent voice teacher, do they also have an independent voice studio? So do they understand, like, if I'm teaching in an academic setting, so if I'm teaching at an institution, the parameters for success at an institution, in an academic setting especially, are so much different. They're much, much different than the way that I can set up parameters for success in an independent studio, right? So parameters for success mean you do these specific performances, even if it's if it's music theater, if it's jazz, all of the different kinds of academic and institutional settings all have specific parameters for success, which rely on some form in general, rely on some form of performance as that parameter for success, right? So your lessons, your classes, blah, blah, blah. The parameter for success is determined by, like, how well you performed at the end of your year, at the end of your course, at the end of your blah, 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 right? There's all of these performance parameters. which is fine. That's the way that's the way the academic system works, right? They've got to have some kind of like way to assess whether or not all of that money that you paid is whether or not you are doing jumping through all of the hoops so that you can justify paying all of that money, right? That's a whole other topic. But anyway, so they have those parameters for success. And we sometimes then look at the teachers who are teaching in an institution, an academic institution, and we sometimes then as independent teachers take on those parameters for success from those teachers, right? So those teachers have this assumed like, here's what success looks like. And so we kind of take that on in the studio when we don't have to. In the independent voice studio, right? We get to set our own parameters for success. So who are you listening to and who is telling you what success looks like? Does success look like being able to sing a 45-minute art song recital? If that's what success looks like, you're probably in an independent voice studio going to have a lot of unsuccessful singers, probably. And obviously that's an extreme example because we do often use, recitals in the independent studio as a parameter, as a sort of assessment of success. We often do. But I'm here to say you don't have to. And if you're listening to folks who are in an institutional setting, this is sort of one example. If you're listening to folks who are in an institutional setting, that's amazing. And understand, be critical about all of the information that is coming, because those folks are in a different setting than you are, right? Their parameters for success and their teaching assessments, their teaching styles, their teaching modalities, their understanding of communication and language and how we work with singers. I mean, they're working with really specific singers, right? Really specific, and they're working with singers who have paid a lot of money to get a degree in most cases. In an independent voice studio, we're not handing out degrees. We don't have to have parameters of success in that way. We don't have to teach to a recital. No, we don't. So often in an academic setting, we're teaching to the performance at the end, right? So we're teaching to that. We don't have to do that. We get to set up our own parameters of success, which means that we get to set up our own way of teaching. We get to set up our own way of using language. We get to set our own communication, our own studio policies, all of those things. So take into consideration those things. What is that voice ped person's background? Who are they teaching on the regular? And what does that mean in terms of how they're going to, what they're going to have as, useful information and and the kinds of things that will work in their studio versus what's going to work in your studio? And then where are they teaching? What are their assumed parameters of success? And then how is that different from where you're teaching and what your assumed parameters of success can be, right? So all of that to say, there are lots of different ways, right, to get information, and I kind of touched on that in the beginning. And I've done a live a while back now, probably a couple years back now. I did a live talking about getting voice ped information without reading a book, like ways to train without having to read a voice ped text. And I have nothing against reading voice ped text, obviously. I'm saying all of the ways that you're getting information right now, terrific. If you're reading books, amazing. Voice ped text, amazing. If you're reading like the Journal of Singing, amazing. Understand, if you're reading the Journal of Singing, Journal of Voice, if you're reading that information, that's fantastic. The majority of the folks who are writing in the Journal of Singing, for example, are not independent voice teachers working with the population of like age 6 to 18, and then like adult avocational singers, right? The majority of the folks writing in the journals are academic folks, which is fine. It's fine. Recognize that. Understand. Those folks are not necessarily giving me information that is going to be useful for the population that I work with and for the kind of teaching that I do and the studio I want to have. It's not necessarily going to be useful for me. So you can follow folks, like you can read the journals, you can read the textbooks, you can read the blogs, you can get to, there's lots of great blogs out there, you can read the blogs. You can also, follow people on, like you're doing right now. You can follow on Facebook. You can follow, there's lots of great teachers on TikTok doing, some fantastic work on TikTok. All the socials have great, great people to follow. And of course you can take courses and you can do continuing ed and, of course, I have stuff that you can do if you didn't know. But big whole thing overall, know who you're listening to, understand how that voice in your head, how the voice ped voice in your head, how that information is being filtered through that person, and being really intentional about understanding how it applies to you and to your population of students and to the way that you want to run your independent voice studio. So that's all I'm going to talk about today. Just a kind of a quick live office hours here, not even a full hour, but just keeping that in the back of your mind. Who am I listening to? Where are they coming from? Who are they teaching on the regular? And what is their understanding of success? So all of those things will come into the way that they talk about teaching, the way they talk about voice pedagogy, like the way they talk about the way they talk about onset, the way they talk about inhalation. It all influences all of those things. Okay, I'm going to say one thing. I know I said I was going to stop. I'm going to say one thing. An example of this is the concept of onset, right? So the concept of onset. We will hear folks saying, for example, in the structure of singing, we'll hear folks talking about the concept of onset and balance, right? So having a balanced onset. We don't want it to be too pressurized, or we don't want it to be too hard or glottal, and we don't want it to be too breathy or too open or aspirate, right? So this concept of onset. But you know what? The only style, one of the only styles where balanced onset means that we are doing a really specific kind of flow, like that we're doing a very specific kind of coordination, is Western classical singing. Everybody else, balanced onset means whatever is going to work for you to get the tonal outcome you're looking for. So if we take balanced onset from someone who works almost exclusively with Western classical singers, and we take that on as the way that onset must be, we're going to be doing a disservice to the folks who require a more highly pressurized onset that goes a little bit more toward a glottal or hard onset, maybe not all the way over, but a glottal or hard onset in order to create, say, a belt sound. So the balanced onset that we're looking for in order to create a belt sound, I'm just going to put belt in quotes just because, in order to create a belt sound is not going to be useful in Western classical singing. And the Western classical singing balanced onset is not necessarily useful to create a belt sound. It's just not. There are two different kinds of onsets, or two different kinds of coordinations that lead to two different kinds of tonal outcomes. So if we are not, intentional about like being really clear about those things, we can unintentionally take on the concept of a balanced onset from someone who teaches almost, exclusively Western classical singers, and or someone who hasn't, kind of figured this out yet in their own teaching. So we can kind of take that on and be like, okay, this is the way that onset's supposed to be every single time, and it's not useful for our words. It's not useful for the folks who want to have a belt tonal outcome. Not useful. Not useful. So that's an example of something where we might take something on and sort of apply in a way that isn't going to be useful for the students that we're working with. Okay. Have a terrific weekend. Do maybe let some of these things kind of, filter in, and maybe over the weekend as you're looking at the folks that you're following and the folks who you're getting information from, and the folks who are influencing your voice ped and your teaching, just maybe do a little bit of a deep dive there and kind of figure out who are they teaching. You're so welcome. You're so welcome. Who are they teaching? And just kind of do a little bit of thinking about that. Where are their ideas coming from? And again, who are they teaching? And in what space are they teaching? What are their kind of things? Yeah. Oh, Petra, thank you for the claps. Hi, Michelle. Good. Thank you, Michelle. I'm glad you found it useful. That's amazing. Yeah, just do a little bit of thinking about that. All right, and have a fabulous weekend. I will see you Monday morning, 9 a.m. my time, and which is Eastern time. And if you have any sort of like technical questions, anything along those lines that you're interested in kind of taking apart, let me know. I'll see what I can do to get them answered in live office hours on Monday. Take good care. Have a great weekend. Thanks, Amy. Yeah, I'm glad you found it useful. Oh, whoops. Got some weird stuff here. Hold on. Let's stop that one. My super fancy, super professional way of doing things over here, and I'm going to end over here. Take care.